The funeral flowers were too perfect. White lilies arranged in precise rows, their cloying sweetness mixing with the scent of mahogany and grief. I sat in the front pew of St. Catherine's Chapel, my black dress appropriately rumpled, my eyes properly red from 3 days of calculated tears. Around me, whispered condolences floated through the air like smoke. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special. For you! Such a tragedy, losing Emma so young. Car accidents are just so sudden. At least she didn't suffer. I nodded at each platitude, playing the grieving mother with the same precision I'd once used to play the devoted wife. My husband Marcus sat beside me, his hand occasionally squeezing mine in what everyone assumed was comfort. Only I knew the warning in his grip, the silent reminder of our agreed-upon story. 24-year-old Emma Richardson, my brilliant daughter with dreams of becoming a marine biologist, had died in a single car accident on Highway 101. Tragic, unavoidable, final. Except, none of it was true. She was such a bright light, Father Mackenzie intoned from the pulpit, his voice carrying easily through the packed chapel. Emma touched so many lives in her brief time with us. I forced myself to look at the casket, polished to a mirror shine. Draped with more white flowers, it dominated the altar like a statement. The casket that should have held my daughter's body. The casket that held nothing but weighted sandbags and the lies we'd built our marriage on. 3 rows behind me, I could hear Emma's college friends sobbing. Real tears for a real loss, except the loss wasn't death. It was something far worse. The systematic erasure of everything Emma had been, everyone she'd loved, every dream she'd harbored. Marcus shifted beside me, his expensive suit rustling against the pew. To everyone watching, he was the picture of a devastated stepfather. Tall, distinguished at 52, with silver threading through his dark hair and the kind of gravitas that made people trust him instinctively. District Attorney Marcus Richardson had built his career on righteous fury and unshakable integrity. Only I knew what he'd built it on top of. The service dragged on with practiced solemnity, scripture readings about resurrection and eternal peace. A eulogy from Emma's best friend Sarah that left half the congregation in tears. A violin solo that Emma would have loved. She'd always been drawn to melancholy music. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Through it all, I maintained my mask. The brave widow holding herself together through sheer will. Inside, I was cataloging faces, noting who had come, who was watching Marcus too closely, who might have suspected something was wrong in the months before Emma's supposed death. Because Emma hadn't died 3 days ago in a car accident. She'd disappeared 6 months ago, and I was the only one who knew the truth about where she'd gone. The only one who knew that my mother's dying words hadn't been the ravings of a woman lost to dementia, but a desperate attempt to save her granddaughter. "Your daughter isn't dead," my mother had whispered at his funeral 2 years ago, her fingers gripping mine with surprising strength. "The coffin was empty. Your husband killed her." At the time, I'd dismissed it as confusion. Mother had been slipping, for months, mixing up names and dates, seeing threats that weren't there. The funeral she'd referenced had been her own brother's, my Uncle Robert, who'd died suddenly of a heart attack. There had been no daughter, no husband, no empty coffin. But now, sitting in front of another empty coffin, I understood she hadn't been talking about the past at all. She'd been seeing the future. The congregation rose for the final hymn, voices joining in, amazing grace with the wavering harmony of grief. I stood with them, my legs steady despite the earthquake happening. Inside my chest, in my purse, my phone buzzed with a text message. Without looking, I knew it was from the private investigator I'd hired 3 months ago. The same investigator who'd confirmed my worst fears about Marcus. about what he was capable of, about what he'd already done. As the service concluded, people began filing past the casket to pay their respects. Marcus stood first, his hand on my elbow guiding me forward. We approached the flowers and polished wood together, the grieving parents making their final goodbye. I placed my hand on the casket lid, feeling the cool metal of the handles beneath my palm. Somewhere, Emma was alive, hidden, afraid, probably, convinced that her mother had betrayed her, that her stepfather's version of events was the truth. Marcus leaned in close, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You're doing beautifully, Claire. Emma would be proud." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. He was enjoying this. The performance, the deception, the way everyone looked at him with sympathy while he played the role of devoted family. Man struck by tragedy. "Thank you," I whispered back, my voice catching just enough to sell the grief. Inside, I was already planning. The cemetery was worse than the church. Rolling green hills dotted with granite markers, the fresh grave a dark wound in the manicured landscape. The funeral director had done an excellent job with the staging. Even I had to admit the lowering of the empty casket looked convincing. As dirt hit the lid with hollow thuds, I closed my eyes and made Emma a promise. Whatever Marcus had done, wherever he'd hidden her, however he'd convinced the world she was dead, I would find the truth. I would find her, and I would make him pay for every lie he'd told, every fear he'd instilled, every moment of her life he'd stolen. The crowd began to disperse, people approaching with final condolences before heading to their cars. I shook hands, accepted hugs, nodded at offers of casseroles and company, playing the part while my mind raced through possibilities. "Mrs. Richardson?" A young woman approached hesitantly, her red hair catching the afternoon sunlight. "I'm Detective Lisa Park with the County Sheriff's Office. I was the responding officer to Emma's accident." My heart stuttered. In the months of planning this charade, we'd been careful to ensure Marcus's law enforcement connections would handle the investigation. Someone new asking questions was not part of the script. "Of course," I said, extending my hand. "Thank you for everything you did that night." Detective Park's grip was firm, her eyes sharp as they studied my face. "I wanted to express my condolences, but also to let you know that we're still processing some evidence from the scene. There might be additional questions in the coming weeks." Marcus materialized beside me with the smooth efficiency of years in courtrooms. "Detective Park, I'm Marcus Richardson, Emma's stepfather. I believe we spoke on the phone." "District Attorney Richardson, yes." Her tone was carefully neutral. "I was just explaining to Mrs. Richardson that the investigation remains active." "Of course. We appreciate your thoroughness." Marcus's hand settled on my shoulder, a gesture that would look supportive to anyone watching but felt like a warning to me. "Claire and I are committed to cooperating fully with any ongoing investigation." Detective Park nodded, but her eyes remained on my face. "Mrs. Richardson, I know this is a difficult time, but if you remember anything about Emma's state of mind in the days before the accident, anything unusual in her behavior or routine, please don't hesitate to call." She handed me a business card, and for a moment our fingers touched. In that brief contact, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Someone was still asking questions. Someone might still be looking for the truth. "Thank you," I said, slipping the card into my purse beside my phone, which had buzzed 3 more times during the graveside service. "I'll certainly be in touch if anything comes to mind." As Detective Park walked away, Marcus's grip on my shoulder tightened. "Curious," he murmured. "I thought we'd handled all the official inquiries." "Traffic accidents require thorough investigation," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "You know that better than anyone." But inside, I was already wondering what evidence they'd found, what questions they were asking, and whether Detective Park's interest in Emma's case was routine procedure or something more. The drive home was silent. Marcus focused on the road. while I stared out the passenger window at the familiar streets of Millbrook. Our small coastal town had always felt like a sanctuary, close-knit community, beautiful scenery, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors and looked out for each other. Now it felt like a stage set, every familiar landmark part of an elaborate performance designed to hide the truth about what had happened to Emma. We pulled into the circular driveway of our colonial-style home, the house Emma had moved into when I married Marcus 5 years ago. She'd been 19 then, initially wary of her new stepfather, but gradually warming to his charm and attention. He'd encouraged her education, funded her dreams of studying marine biology, even helped her get internships through his political connections. The perfect stepfather, the devoted husband, the upstanding member of the community. As we walked up the front steps, past the flower arrangements that had been arriving for days, I caught sight of our reflection in the front doors. Glass panels. We looked exactly like what we were supposed to be. A couple united in grief, supporting each other through an unthinkable loss. The image was perfect, and it was completely false. Inside, Marcus loosened his tie and poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon from the crystal decanter on his desk. "That went well?" he said, settling into his leather chair. Father Mackenzie's eulogy was particularly moving. I nodded, hanging up my black coat in the hallway closet. My phone buzzed again, and this time I pulled it out to check the messages. 3 texts from my private investigator, David Chen. All marked urgent. Without a word to Marcus, I walked upstairs to our bedroom, closed the door, and opened the messages. The first was a photograph. Emma sitting at an outdoor cafe, alive and unmistakably real, dated just 2 weeks ago. The second was an address in Portland, Oregon, with a note, "Safe house." She's been moved 3 times in 6 months. The third made my blood run cold. He knows I'm close. Meeting tonight. Marina parking lot. 10 p.m. Come alone. I deleted the messages and slipped the phone back into my purse, my hands shaking for the first time all day. Emma was alive. She was in Portland, and someone was helping her stay hidden. But David's warning echoed in my mind as I changed out of my funeral dress and tried to process what I'd learned. Marcus knew the investigator was closing in, which meant tonight's meeting might be a trap. Downstairs, I could hear Marcus making phone calls, probably following up with political contacts, maintaining the careful network of relationships that kept his world spinning smoothly. In a few hours, I would have to sit across the dinner table from him and pretend that everything was normal, that I believed our daughter was dead, that I trusted him with my life, when the truth was that I was married to a man who had made my daughter disappear, a man who had convinced the world she was dead while keeping her hidden somewhere, afraid and isolated, for reasons I was only beginning to understand. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at Detective Park's business card, weighing my options. I could call her, tell her everything I suspected, hope that law enforcement would be enough to find Emma and bring her home safely, or I could go to that meeting tonight and learn the truth myself. Either choice was a gamble, but after 6 months of playing the obedient wife while my daughter remained missing, I was tired of letting other people control the game. Outside our bedroom window, the sun was setting over Millbrook Bay, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere out there, Emma was watching a different sunset, probably wondering if anyone was looking for her, if anyone still believed she was alive. I picked up my phone and typed a single word back to David. Confirmed. Tonight, I would start playing by my own rules. Tonight, I would begin the process of bringing my daughter home. And Marcus, the man who had orchestrated this elaborate charade of death and grief, would finally face the consequences of underestimating the woman he'd married. Because while he'd been busy convincing the world that Emma was dead, I'd been quietly preparing to prove that the only thing dead in our house was the trust between husband and wife. The real game was just beginning. As darkness settled over our seemingly perfect home, I began planning for a meeting that would either reunite me with my daughter or cost me everything I had left to lose. But after months of living with lies, even the truth felt like a risk worth taking. After all, some deceptions are so carefully constructed that only complete destruction can expose what lies beneath, and I was ready to burn it all down. The marina, at night, was a graveyard of masts and rigging, their shadows dancing across the moonlit water like skeletal fingers. I parked at the far end of the lot, away from the security lights, my heart hammering against my ribs as I scanned for any sign of David Chen's silver Honda. The lot was empty except for a maintenance truck and my own car. Either I was early, or David's warning about Marcus knowing had proven prophetic. I checked my phone. 9:47 p.m. Still 13 minutes until our scheduled meeting. I'd left Marcus reading case files in his study, claiming exhaustion from the funeral and an early bedtime. He'd barely looked up when I kissed his cheek, too absorbed in whatever legal strategy he was crafting to notice that I'd changed into dark jeans and sneakers. The perfect husband, I thought bitterly, watching the shadows between the boats for any movement. So trusting of his grieving wife. Headlights swept across the parking lot, and I slumped lower in my seat as a car pulled into the space 3 rows over. The engine cut off, but no one emerged. I waited, counting my heartbeats, until a figure finally stepped out and began walking toward the docks. Even in the dim light, I recognized David's compact frame and measured stride. He'd been my salvation for the past 3 months, the only person willing to investigate Emma's disappearance when everyone else accepted Marcus's story without question. I grabbed my purse and slipped out of my car, my footsteps echoing off the concrete as I made my way toward the pier. David was waiting beside a wooden bench overlooking the water, his face grim in the moonlight. "You came?" he said without preamble. "I wasn't sure you would. You said you had proof Emma's alive." "Of course I came." I sat beside him on the bench, noting how his eyes kept scanning the parking lot behind us. "Are we safe here?" "Safer than meeting at your house." David pulled out a manila envelope, thick with documents and photographs. "What I'm about to show you changes everything, Claire. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about the empty casket we'd lowered into the ground 6 hours ago, about the tears I'd shed for a daughter who was supposedly dead but actually hidden away somewhere, afraid and alone. "I'm prepared." David opened the envelope and handed me the first photograph. Emma sitting at the outdoor cafe I'd seen in his text, but this image was clearer, showing more detail. She was thinner than I remembered, her dark hair cut shorter, but unmistakably alive. A man sat across from her, his back to the camera. Portland, Oregon. 2 weeks ago. David's voice was quiet, professional. The man with her is Thomas Kellner, former FBI agent turned private security. Very expensive, very discreet. Private security for what? Witness protection. Unofficial, but effective. He handed me another photo, this one showing Emma walking into what looked like a small apartment building. She's been moved 4 times in 6 months. Portland is her latest location. My hands shook as I studied the image. Emma looked cautious, constantly checking over her shoulder as she approached the building. The body language of someone who lived in fear. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would Marcus do this to her? To us?" David was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dark water. "That's where it gets complicated. I've been investigating your husband for 3 months, following the money trail, digging into his past cases. What I found suggests Emma didn't just stumble onto something she shouldn't have seen. She was targeted specifically because of information she possessed." He handed me a thick folder of documents, bank records, legal filings, correspondence between Marcus and various shell companies. The paperwork was dense, filled with legal jargon and financial terminology that made my head spin. "The simplified version," David continued, "is that your husband has been running a sophisticated money laundering operation through his position as district attorney. He's been selectively prosecuting cases, making evidence disappear, and taking payments from some very dangerous people to ensure certain investigations never see the light of day. I stared at him, struggling to process what he was telling me. Marcus, the man I'd married, the pillar of community integrity, was corrupt on a scale I couldn't have imagined. Emma found out, David said. 6 months ago, she was working on a research project for her marine biology program. Something about pollution patterns in the bay. She started noticing discrepancies between environmental reports and what she was observing in the field. When she dug deeper, she discovered that several major investigations into industrial dumping had been quietly dropped by the DA's office. Marcus's office. Emma being Emma, she didn't let it go. She started documenting everything, building a case for environmental fraud. She had no idea she was actually uncovering evidence of her stepfather's criminal activities. David pulled out another photograph, this one showing Emma with a stack of documents at what looked like a copy shop. The timestamp showed it was taken, just days before her supposed death. She was preparing to go public. The night before the accident that never happened, Emma called the State Environmental Agency and the FBI. She'd scheduled meetings with both agencies for the following week. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Marcus hadn't made Emma disappear out of malice or control. He'd done it out of necessity. She'd been about to expose him, destroy everything he'd built, send him to prison for decades. The car accident was staged, I said, more statement than question. Brilliantly staged. Marcus used his law enforcement connections to ensure he controlled the investigation from the beginning. The responding officers, the medical examiner, the insurance investigators, all people who owed him favors or were already on his payroll. But her body never existed. The medical examiner who signed the death certificate has gambling debts that Marcus's associates have been covering for years. The funeral director who prepared the casket received a substantial donation to his daughter's college fund. Everyone who needed to be bought was bought. I closed my eyes, feeling sick. The elaborate funeral, the grief of Emma's friends, the flowers and condolences, all of it theater designed to sell a lie. Where does Thomas Kellner fit in? That's the interesting part. David leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Kellner wasn't hired by Marcus. He was hired by Emma. What? Emma was smarter than anyone gave her credit for. When she realized she was in danger, she reached out to people who could help her disappear. Kellner specializes in protecting witnesses who can't trust official channels. Emma's been paying him with money from a trust fund your mother set up. For her. Money Marcus never knew existed. The trust fund. I'd forgotten about it. A modest inheritance my mother had arranged before her death. Emma had access to it when she turned 21, but she'd never mentioned using it for anything significant. She's been hiding from her own stepfather, paying for protection, living in fear for 6 months. The weight of it settled over me like lead. And I've been playing the grieving mother while she's been out there thinking her family abandoned. Her! There's more. David's expression was grim. Marcus isn't just corrupt. He's dangerous. 3 people who've gotten too close to exposing his operation have died in the past 2 years. Accidents, suicides, medical emergencies, all perfectly explainable, all conveniently timed. You think he's killed people? I think your husband is a sociopath who's built his entire life on a foundation of lies and violence. Emma's disappearance was the least harmful option available to him. A sound from the parking lot made us both freeze. Car doors slamming, multiple vehicles arriving at once. David grabbed my arm, his grip tight with urgency. We need to go. Now. But it was too late. Flashlight beams swept across the pier as armed figures moved between the boats. I could hear voices coordinating positions, the professional efficiency of law enforcement conducting a raid. Dr. Chen, Mrs. Richardson, this is the FBI. Please remain where you are and keep your hands visible." David cursed under his breath, stuffing the photographs back into the envelope. He knew. Marcus knew about our meeting. How? Your phone, your car, your credit cards. He's had months to set up surveillance. We walked right into this. Agent Sarah Martinez stepped into the circle of light cast by the marina's security lamps, her FBI credentials clearly visible. She was younger than I'd expected, with short-cropped hair and the kind of alert posture that suggested extensive training. "Mrs. Richardson, I'm Agent Martinez. We've been investigating your husband's activities for the past year. We know about Emma." Relief flooded through me so suddenly I felt dizzy. "You know she's alive?" "We know she's in protective custody. We also know that meeting with Dr. Chen tonight has put both of you in considerable danger." David stood slowly, his hands raised, but his voice defiant. "We were sharing information about Emma's location. Her mother has a right to know her daughter is safe. Her mother has a right to stay alive," Agent Martinez replied sharply. "Marcus Richardson has been monitoring all communications in and out of his house for months. The moment Claire left tonight, he knew where she was going and why." As if summoned by her words, my phone buzzed with a text message. "Marcus. Working late at the office. Don't wait up. Love you." The casual normalcy of it made my skin crawl. He was providing himself an alibi while his wife and her investigator were being surrounded by federal agents. "We need to get you both to a safe location," Agent Martinez continued. "Tonight's surveillance was compromised from the beginning. Marcus knows we're closing in, and he's going to start eliminating loose ends." "Emma," I said, panic rising in my throat. "If he knows you're investigating, if he knows she's alive..." "Emma's safe. We moved her to a federal facility 3 days ago. Thomas Kellner has been working with us from the beginning. He's a contract agent, not just private security." David lowered his hands slowly. "You've been using Emma as bait." "We've been using Emma's situation to build a case against her stepfather. Her testimony about what she discovered, combined with the evidence Dr. Chen has gathered in our own investigation, will be enough to put Marcus Richardson away for the rest of his life." The sound of approaching vehicles made Agent Martinez speak faster, more urgently. "But that only works if key witnesses stay alive long enough to testify. Marcus has killed to protect his operation before. He won't hesitate to do it again." Through the darkness, I could see lights moving along the coastal road that led to the marina, multiple vehicles approaching fast. "Is that him?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from Agent Martinez's expression. "Marcus and some of his associates. They're planning to make this look like a murder-suicide. Grieving mother kills private investigator before taking her own life, unable to cope with the loss of her daughter." David grabbed my arm. "We need to go now." But Agent Martinez was already shaking her head. "The marina's surrounded. Marcus made sure of that. Our only option is to get you both on a boat and out." "Into the bay?" "I don't understand how he knew," I said, even as we ran toward the pier where several FBI agents were preparing a speedboat. "I was so careful." "Your wedding ring," Agent Martinez said, helping me into the boat. "Top-end surveillance device. Audio, GPS tracking, even vital sign monitoring. Marcus has been listening to every conversation, tracking every movement for months." I stared down at the simple gold band I'd worn for 5 years, the symbol of love and trust that had become an instrument of betrayal. With shaking fingers, I pulled it off and dropped it into the dark water. The boat's engine roared to life as headlights swept across the parking lot behind us. Through the marina's darkness, I could see figures moving between the boats, searching systematically for any sign of our presence. "Where are we going?" David shouted over the engine noise. "Federal. Safe house," Agent Martinez replied, steering us toward the open water. 20 miles up the coast. Emma's waiting for you there." Emma. After 6 months of grief and lies and carefully maintained pretense, I was finally going to see my daughter again. But instead of joy, All I felt was terror for what came next. Behind us, searchlights began sweeping the water as Marcus's people realized we'd escaped by boat. Within minutes, they would have vessels of their own in pursuit. Marcus had spent years building relationships with law enforcement, creating networks of loyalty and obligation that extended far beyond the official boundaries of his office. "How many people does he have working for him?" I asked. "Too many," Agent Martinez admitted grimly. "Coast Guard, Harbor Patrol, local sheriff's department. We're not sure who we can trust. That's why we're going to the safe house instead of trying to fight this out on the water." The coastline flew past us in a blur of rocks and moonlit surf. Each mile that separated us from Marcus and his people was a small victory. But I could see tension in Agent Martinez's shoulders, the way her eyes kept checking the radar screen for pursuing boats. "Mrs. Richardson," she said without looking away from the water ahead, "I need you to understand that after tonight, your life as Claire Richardson is over. You can never go back to that house, to that marriage, to any part of the identity Marcus helped create for you." "Good," I said, surprised by the vehemence in my own voice. I want it over. But even as I spoke the words, I wondered if I truly understood what I was giving up. The comfortable home, the social status, the financial security, all of it had been built on blood money, but it had still been my life for 5 years. Now Emma and I would both be starting over, assuming we survived long enough to get the chance. The safe house appeared ahead of us, a small compound of buildings on an isolated stretch of coastline. As we approached the dock, I could see armed agents positioned around the perimeter, their presence both reassuring and ominous. "Remember," Agent Martinez said as she killed the engine, "Emma has been living with the belief that Marcus killed you to keep you from asking questions about her disappearance. She's been in protective custody thinking she's an orphan." "What? Did you tell her?" "The truth, that her stepfather staged her death to cover up his crimes, and that her mother has been searching for her ever since." I stepped onto the dock on unsteady legs, David close behind me. After months of lies and pretense, and careful performance, the prospect of simply being honest with my daughter felt both liberating and terrifying. "Claire?" I turned toward the voice and saw Emma standing in the doorway of the main building, flanked by 2 federal agents. She was thinner than in the photographs David had shown me, her face drawn with months of stress and fear, but unmistakably alive. Emma. We ran toward each other across the 20 feet of dock that separated us. 6 months of grief and terror and desperate hope colliding in an embrace that felt like resurrection. "I thought you were dead," she sobbed against my shoulder. "Marcus said you'd been in an accident, that you'd been asking too many questions." "I thought you were dead," I replied, holding her so tightly I was afraid I might hurt her. "The funeral, the casket, everyone believing—" "He made me watch," Emma said, her voice breaking. "Video of the funeral. He wanted me to see what happened. To people who got in his way." The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. Marcus had forced Emma to watch her own funeral, to see her friends and family grieving, to understand the power he wielded over both their lives. But we were together now. Against all odds, despite all of Marcus's careful planning and manipulation, Emma and I had found each other again. The real question was whether we would survive long enough to make him pay for what he'd put us through. Because, somewhere behind us in the darkness, Marcus Richardson was discovering that his carefully constructed empire of lies was finally beginning to crumble. And desperate men with everything to lose were the most dangerous of all. The federal safe house felt like a fortress and a prison simultaneously. Steel-reinforced doors, bulletproof windows, and enough surveillance equipment to monitor a small city. Emma and I sat in the main conference room at 3 a.m., surrounded by stacks of evidence that detailed the last 5 years of my marriage to a man I'd never really known. "The environmental reports were just the beginning," Emma said, her voice steadier now that we'd had hours to process our reunion. Once I started digging into the pollution data, I found discrepancies in dozens of cases Marcus's office had handled. Agent I. Martinez spread out a series of photographs across the table. Industrial sites, shipping records, bank transfers. The paper trail of corruption that had turned my husband into one of the most dangerous criminals on the East Coast. Emma's research inadvertently uncovered a money laundering operation that's been running for nearly a decade, Martinez explained. Marcus Richardson has been selectively prosecuting environmental crimes, taking bribes to make evidence disappear, and funneling dirty money through shell companies. I stared at the photos, trying to reconcile them with the man who'd made me coffee every morning for 5 years. How much money are we talking about? Conservative estimate? $40 million. David Chen had been quiet since our arrival, but now he pulled out his laptop and began displaying financial records. Marcus has been taking payments from chemical companies, waste management firms, and industrial manufacturers. In exchange, he ensures their environmental violations never see the inside of a courtroom. Emma leaned forward, pointing to a specific document. The Morrison chemical plant discharge case from 3 years ago. I remember Marcus being stressed about it, working late nights, claiming it was a complex prosecution. He dropped all charges 6 weeks later, Martinez said. Morrison Chemical paid a fine of $50,000 instead of facing criminal prosecution that could have resulted in millions in damages and prison time for their executives. And Marcus received a payment of $200,000 through one of his shell companies, David added. The environmental damage from that discharge is still affecting marine life in the bay. The scope of it was staggering. Not just corruption, but environmental destruction that would impact the community for decades. Every case Marcus had buried meant more poison in the water, more damage to the ecosystem Emma loved studying. There's something else, Emma said, quietly. Something I didn't tell the FBI initially because I wasn't sure if it was connected. We all turned to look at her, and I saw my daughter the way she'd been before all this started, brilliant, determined, unafraid to ask difficult questions. 3 months before I discovered the pollution discrepancies, I was approached by someone who claimed to be a journalist, Rebecca Walsh. She said she was investigating environmental crime in coastal communities and asked if I'd noticed anything unusual in my research. Martinez and David exchanged glances. What did you tell her? Nothing specific. I barely knew her, and I was trained to be cautious about sharing research data with outsiders. But she gave me her card and asked me to call if I found anything. Interesting. Emma pulled out a business card that had clearly seen better days. The contact information looked legitimate. Rebecca Walsh, environmental investigative reporter, Portland Tribune. I tried to call her after I discovered the first discrepancies, Emma continued. The number was disconnected. When I looked up her name at the Tribune, they said they'd never heard of her. Agent Martinez took the card, studying it carefully. Professional quality printing, legitimate-looking credentials. This is sophisticated work. You think Marcus sent her? I asked. I think Marcus has been playing a much longer game than any of us realized, Martinez replied. If he was monitoring Emma's research from the beginning, he would have known exactly when she was getting close to something dangerous. David pulled up another file on his laptop. I found something similar when I started investigating. 3. People who tried to expose Marcus's operation over the past 2 years were approached by helpful strangers offering to collaborate on their investigations. What happened to them? Dr. Patricia Vance, marine biologist at the State University. Car accident on a rainy night, skidded off a mountain road. No witnesses. Emma's face went white. I knew Dr. Vance. She was supposed to be my thesis advisor before she died. Thomas Reed, former EPA inspector who started asking questions about dropped cases. Apparent suicide, jumped from his apartment building. Left a note about depression and career disappointment. And the third? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Sarah Mitchell, investigative journalist who was working on a story about prosecutorial misconduct. House fire while she slept. Electrical fault, according to the investigation. The conference room fell silent as we absorbed the implications. Marcus hadn't just been covering up his crimes, he'd been systematically eliminating anyone who got too close to the truth. "How many people know we're here?" I asked Martinez. "Fewer than 10, and they're all people I trust with my life. But Marcus has resources we're still trying to identify. His network extends into federal law enforcement, state government, even private military contractors." Through the bulletproof windows, I could see the first hints of dawn creeping across the horizon. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably discovering that his carefully controlled world was falling apart. His wife was missing, his stepdaughter was alive, and federal agents were closing in on years of criminal activity. "What's the plan?" Emma asked. "We can't hide here forever." Martinez opened another folder, this one containing legal documents and strategic assessments. "The plan is to bring Marcus Richardson down completely. Not just arrest him, but dismantle his entire operation and expose every person who helped him." "How?" "With your testimony," she said, looking directly at Emma. "Your research documents, combined with the evidence David gathered and our ongoing investigation, gives us enough to prosecute Marcus on multiple federal charges: money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and murder," I added quietly. "If he killed those 3 people..." "That's harder to prove," Martinez admitted. "But the other charges carry sentences of 25 years to life. Marcus Richardson will never be a free man again." Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring at the evidence spread across the table. What about the people he's been protecting? The companies that paid him to make their crimes disappear? They're next. Once Marcus is arrested, we'll use his records to build cases against every person and organization that participated in the conspiracy. This investigation will take down dozens of people and save millions in environmental damages. David closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. "There's still the immediate problem of keeping you both alive until the trial. Marcus knows his operation is blown. He's going to be looking for ways to eliminate key witnesses." "How long until we can testify?" I asked. "Grand jury hearings start next week. If they return indictments, which they will, the trial could begin within 3 months. But that assumes Marcus doesn't find a way to interfere with the process." A soft chime from Martinez's phone interrupted our conversation. She checked the message, and her expression darkened. "What is it?" Emma asked. "Marcus has been busy tonight. 3 of his associates have left the country in the past 4 hours. Private jets to non-extradition countries. He's liquidating his operation." "That's good, right? Less people trying to kill us?" "It means he's preparing for war," David said grimly. "Men like Marcus don't run when they're cornered. They fight back with everything they have." Martinez stood up, moving to the window to scan the perimeter. "We need to move you both to a more secure location. This safe house was a temporary measure." "Where?" I asked. "Federal Witness Protection Facility in Colorado. Maximum security, isolated location, specialized staff trained for high-threat situations." The thought of being locked away in some underground bunker, even for our own protection, made me feel claustrophobic. "For how long?" "Until Marcus is either in prison or dead." Emma reached across the table and took my hand. "At least we'll be together." I squeezed her fingers, thinking about the life we'd both lost. Emma's dreams of becoming a marine biologist, my comfortable existence as the wife of a respected public official. All of it destroyed by a man who'd convinced us both he was someone completely different from who he really was. "There's something else you need to know," Martinez said, returning to the table with a new set of documents. "Marcus has been monitoring your mother's medical records for the past 2 years. My mother's been dead for 2 years. I mean before her death. Hospital visits, medication records, conversations with her doctors. He was tracking her dementia progression very carefully. A chill ran down my spine. Why? Because your mother knew more than anyone realized. These are transcripts from her medical appointments, times when she was lucid and talking about her concerns for Emma's safety. Martinez handed me a medical file marked with my mother's name. Inside were notes from her doctor, documenting conversations that had seemed like dementia-induced confusion at the time. Patient continues to express concern about son-in-law's behavior toward granddaughter. Claims to have witnessed inappropriate monitoring of girls' activities, computer use, personal communications. I remembered those conversations. My mother's insistence that Marcus was watching Emma too closely, her paranoid-sounding claims that he was reading Emma's emails and tracking her movements. I'd dismissed it all as symptoms of her declining mental state. Your mother tried to warn you, Martinez continued. Multiple times, according to these records. She told her doctor, her nurses, anyone who would listen that Marcus was dangerous and that Emma was in trouble. Emma was reading over my shoulder, her face pale. Grandma knew. She tried to protect me, and everyone thought she was just confused. Marcus certainly hoped so, David added. But he couldn't take the chance that she might say something convincing to the wrong person. Look at the timeline. Your mother's final decline coincided perfectly with Emma's research discoveries. I flipped through more pages, seeing the pattern. Now. Every time my mother had become more agitated about Marcus, her medication had been adjusted. Every time she'd tried to warn someone about Emma's danger, she'd suffered a setback in her condition. You think he was drugging her? I think. Marcus Richardson has been planning this for a very long time, Martinez said. Longer than any of us imagined. My phone, which had been silent since the marina, suddenly buzzed with an incoming call. The display showed Marcus's photo, his familiar smile now looking like a mask hiding something monstrous. Don't answer it, David warned. Actually, Martinez said, do answer it. We need to know what he's thinking. I stared at the phone, my finger hovering over the accept button. After everything I'd learned in the past few hours, the thought of hearing Marcus's voice made me feel sick. But Emma nodded encouragingly, and I realized this might be our only chance to understand what came next. I answered the call and put it on speaker. Claire? Thank God. I've been worried sick. Marcus's voice was exactly as I remembered, warm, concerned, loving. The perfect husband discovering his wife was missing. Marcus. My voice sounded steady, though my heart was racing. Where are you, honey? I came home and found your car gone, your phone not answering. I've been calling hospitals, thinking something terrible had happened. The performance was flawless. If I hadn't known better, I would have believed every word. I'm safe, I said, looking at Emma across the table. I know the truth about everything. A long pause on the other end of the line. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. What truth is that, Claire? About Emma. About your operation. About the people you've killed to cover it up. Another pause. Longer, this time. I think you've been listening to some very dangerous people. People who don't have your best interests at heart. I've been listening to our daughter. You know Emma? The one who isn't actually dead? The silence stretched out until I wondered if the call had disconnected. Then Marcus laughed. A sound. I'd never heard from him before. Cold. Bitter. Completely devoid of humor. Claire, you have no idea what you're dealing with. The forces you're playing with. The consequences of the choices you're making tonight. I'm dealing with a man who made his stepdaughter watch her own funeral, I replied. A man who's been lying to me for 5 years about who he really is. Everything I did was to protect this family, to protect you from knowing things that would destroy you. Emma leaned toward the phone, her voice clear and strong. Hello, Marcus. Did you miss me? The line went completely silent. I could picture Marcus wherever he was, processing the sound of Emma's voice, understanding that his carefully constructed world had just collapsed entirely. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Emma, you have no idea how Sorry I am that it's come to this. Sorry that you got caught? Or sorry that you destroyed our lives? Sorry that I'm going to have to finish what I started 6 months ago. The line went dead. Agent Martinez was already on her radio, coordinating with the perimeter security team. All units, we have a direct threat. Suspect knows witness location. Prepare for immediate evacuation. David was packing up his evidence files, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. How long until we can move? 10 minutes to prep, another 5 to reach the vehicles. Airfield is 20 minutes from here. Emma grabbed my arm as we stood up from the table. Mom, what if he finds us again? I looked at my daughter, brave, brilliant Emma, who'd survived 6 months of terror and isolation because she'd had the courage to expose the truth. Then we'll be ready for him, I said, because this time we know exactly who we're fighting. But as we prepared to run again, to hide again, to spend months or years looking over our shoulders, I couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus's final words had been more than a threat. They'd sounded like a promise, and Marcus Richardson had never broken a promise in all the years I'd known him, even when I'd wished he would. The helicopter ride to the Colorado facility passed in a blur of mountainous terrain and tense radio communications. Agent Martinez spent the entire flight coordinating with various federal agencies, her voice clipped and professional as she discussed security protocols and threat assessments. Emma sat beside me, staring out at the darkness below, probably wondering how her life had transformed from marine biology research to federal witness protection in the span of 6 months. ETA 15 minutes, the pilot announced through our headsets. Weather's clear, landing pad is secure. I pressed my face against the small window, watching the landscape change from coastal forests to high desert to snow-capped peaks. Each mile that separated us from Marcus felt like a small victory, but I couldn't shake the memory of his final words on the phone. The cold certainty in his voice when he'd promised to finish what he'd started. The federal facility materialized out of the darkness like something from a military compound. Razor wire, guard towers, floodlights that turned the night into harsh artificial day. As we descended toward the landing pad, I counted at least a dozen armed personnel positioned around the perimeter. Looks like a prison, Emma murmured through her headset. It's designed to keep dangerous people out, not in, Martinez replied, though I understand the distinction might feel academic. We touched down with barely a bump, the pilot's skill evident in the smooth landing despite the mountain winds. Within moments, we were surrounded by federal marshals, their movements efficient and coordinated as they escorted us toward the main building. The interior was more comfortable than I'd expected. Clean lines, modern furnishings, floor-to-ceiling, windows that offered spectacular views of the Rocky Mountains during daylight hours. But the bulletproof glass and reinforced steel door frames served as constant reminders that this wasn't a resort. Mrs. Richardson, Emma, welcome to Alpine Station, said a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. I'm Deputy Marshal Rebecca Santos, Facility Commander. I'll be personally overseeing your security during your stay here. She led us through a series of corridors lined with high-tech surveillance equipment and security checkpoints. Everything about the place spoke of serious federal resources devoted to keeping witnesses alive. Your quarters are on the 3rd floor, Santos continued as we entered an elevator that required her keycard to operate. 2 adjoining suites with full amenities. Meals are prepared by our staff, all communications are monitored for your protection, and recreational facilities include a gym, library, and common areas. How long have people stayed here? I asked. Varies depending on the threat level. Shortest stay was 2 weeks. Longest was 18 months. Your situation is unique. The elevator opened onto a corridor that looked more like a high-end hotel than a federal facility. Our suites were comfortable, well-appointed, with views of the mountains that would have been breathtaking under different circumstances. Rest tonight, Santos said, handing us each a tablet loaded with facility information and communication protocols. Tomorrow, we begin intensive preparation for your testimony. The grand jury hearings have been moved up. They start Monday. Monday? Emma looked up from her tablet. That's only 4 days from now. The Justice Department wants to move quickly. Every day Marcus remains free is another opportunity for him to eliminate evidence or witnesses. After Santos left, Emma and I sat in the common area between our suites, both too wired to sleep despite the exhaustion of the past 24 hours. Through the reinforced windows, I could see guards patrolling the perimeter, their movements illuminated by floodlights. "Mom," Emma said quietly, "what if testifying doesn't work? What if Marcus finds a way to beat the charges?" I thought about the evidence we'd seen: bank records, recorded conversations, environmental reports that documented years of systematic corruption. The case against him is solid. Agent Martinez wouldn't have moved this fast if she wasn't confident. But he's been building relationships for decades. Judges, prosecutors, law enforcement. What if some of them are working with him? It was a terrifying possibility I'd been trying not to consider. Marcus's network extended deep into the justice system. How could we be sure that everyone involved in prosecuting him was clean? My tablet chimed with an encrypted message from Agent Martinez. "Update on Marcus's activities. Call when you're secure." I activated the secure communication app and placed the call on speaker so Emma could hear. "Martinez here. How's the facility?" "Like a fortress," I replied. "What's the update?" "Marcus has been busy since our phone call. 3 more of his associates have been found dead in the past 6 hours. 2 apparent suicides, 1 car accident." Emma's face went pale. "He's killing his own people?" "Eliminating loose ends. Anyone who could testify against him or provide evidence of his operations. Classic criminal behavior when an organization is being dismantled." "What about the other cases?" I asked. "The environmental crimes he covered up?" "We're moving on those simultaneously. Federal agents raided 6 companies this morning, seizing documents and arresting executives. The Morrison chemical plant you identified, Emma, is being shut down, pending a full investigation." There was satisfaction in Martinez's voice, the sound of justice finally being served after years of corruption and cover-ups. But I could also hear the underlying tension. "There's something else," she continued. "Marcus has retained Victoria Ashworth as his defense attorney." Emma and I exchanged glances. Even we knew that name, Victoria Ashworth, the most expensive and ruthless criminal defense attorney on the East Coast. She specialized in defending wealthy clients accused of white-collar crimes, and her record of acquittals was legendary. "How can he afford her?" Emma asked. "He's been moving money offshore for months, probably preparing for this possibility. Ashworth doesn't come cheap, but she's very good at what she does." "Which is what, exactly?" "Destroying prosecution witnesses," Martinez replied grimly. "She'll try to discredit Emma's testimony, claim the environmental research was flawed. She'll attack your credibility, Claire, suggest you're a vindictive ex-wife willing to lie for revenge. She'll paint Marcus as a dedicated public servant being framed by federal overreach." The thought of facing cross-examination from someone with Victoria Ashworth's reputation made my stomach clench. I'd seen her on television, her surgical precision in dismantling witnesses who couldn't stand up to her aggressive questioning style. "What about protective measures during the trial?" Emma asked. "Maximum security. The courthouse will be locked down, all personnel vetted, every entrance monitored. But trials are public proceedings. We can't control everyone who might be in that courtroom." After the call ended, Emma and I sat in silence, the weight of what lay ahead settling over us like a heavy blanket. In 4 days, we would face Marcus across a courtroom, knowing that he'd already killed multiple people to protect his secrets. "I keep thinking about the funeral," Emma said eventually. "Watching all my friends crying, seeing you in that black dress, knowing it was all theater. The cruelest part was making you watch. That was pure sadism. He wanted me to understand the power he had, the ability to make people believe whatever story he chose to tell them. I thought about the 5 years I'd spent married to Marcus, the way he'd carefully constructed our life together, the charming courtship, the elegant home, the social status that came with being the district attorney's wife. How much of it had been genuine and how much had been another performance. "The wedding," I said suddenly, a horrible realization dawning. "Emma, you introduced us. At that charity gala, you brought Marcus over to meet me." Emma's eyes widened as she remembered. "The Marine Conservation Fundraiser. You were there representing Mom's Environmental Foundation, and I thought you two would have common interests." But what if it wasn't coincidence? What if Marcus already knew who you were, who I was? What if he targeted our family specifically? The implications were staggering. If Marcus had orchestrated our meeting, pursued me deliberately rather than falling in love organically, then our entire relationship had been a lie from the beginning. Emma was already reaching for her tablet, pulling up internet search functions. "The charity gala was 5 years ago. Let me check who was on the organizing committee, who had access to the guest list." As she typed, I tried to remember details from that night. Marcus approaching us with his practiced charm, asking about my late husband, expressing admiration for the foundation's work. It had seemed like a chance encounter, the kind of meet-cute that happens at charity events. "Mom, look at this." Emma turned her tablet toward me, showing a list of sponsors for the Marine Conservation Gala. Morrison Chemical was a major donor that year, $50,000. Morrison Chemical, the same company whose environmental violations Marcus had buried 3 years later. He was already working with them, I whispered. Even then, he was taking payments to protect polluters, which means he would have known about the foundation, known you were involved in environmental causes. If you'd married someone connected to environmental protection, someone whose stepdaughter was studying marine biology, he'd have inside information about any research that might threaten his clients. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Marcus hadn't fallen in love with me at that charity gala. He'd identified me as a potential asset, someone whose family connections could provide early warning about environmental threats to his operation. My tablet chimed with another message, this one from David Chen. "Found something important. Marcus's financial records show payments to event planning company that organized charity gala. He paid them to ensure he'd be seated at your table." Emma and I stared at each other, the final confirmation of what we'd both begun to suspect. Our entire family had been targeted, infiltrated, manipulated from the beginning. 5 years, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. 5 years of marriage to a man who planned our meeting like a business transaction. And 6 months of me thinking I was hiding from someone who loved me but had been corrupted by greed, Emma added, when the truth is he never loved any of us. We were just tools in his operation. The anger that had been building since the funeral finally boiled over. Marcus hadn't just stolen Emma's life and faked her death. He'd stolen 5 years of my life, built our marriage on lies and manipulation, used our family as cover for his criminal activities. "We're going to destroy him," I said, surprised by the vehemence in my own voice. "Not just testify against him. We're going to make sure Victoria Ashworth can't spin this into some story about misunderstandings and regulatory overreach." Emma nodded, her expression hardening into something I'd never seen before. My gentle, academically minded daughter was gone, replaced by someone who understood exactly what they were fighting for. "The environmental research," she said. "I still have everything. Not just the pollution data, but recordings of phone calls, photographs of illegal dumping, documents that prove Marcus knew exactly what his clients were doing. Martinez said Ashworth would try to discredit your research. Let her try. I've got 5 years of marine biology training and evidence that would hold up in any scientific journal. Marcus can hire the most expensive lawyer in the country, but he can't change the chemical composition of water samples. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something like hope. Emma was right. The environmental evidence was solid, scientific, unshakable. No amount of legal maneuvering could change the fact that Marcus's clients had been poisoning the bay for years while he protected them from prosecution. My tablet chimed again, this time with a message from Deputy Marshal Santos. Secure video. Conference with prosecution team in conference room A. 0800 hours. Tomorrow we would begin the intensive preparation for grand jury testimony. We would rehearse our statements, prepare for cross-examination, and plan for the legal battle that would determine whether Marcus spent the rest of his life in prison or walked free to continue his criminal operation. But tonight, for the first time in months, Emma and I were together and safe. Tomorrow we would begin the process of making Marcus Richardson pay for every life he'd destroyed, every crime he'd covered up, every moment of fear he'd put us through. Mom, Emma said, reaching for my hand across the small table between our chairs. Whatever happens in that courtroom, we tell the truth. All of it. All of it, I agreed, squeezing her fingers. Outside our reinforced windows, snow was beginning to fall on the Colorado mountains, covering the landscape in pristine white. Soon the sun would rise on our first day of preparation for the fight of our lives. And somewhere out there, Marcus Richardson was discovering that the family he'd manipulated and terrorized was about to become his worst nightmare. The hunter was about to become the hunted. And this time, there would be no empty coffins, no staged accidents, no convenient disappearances. This time, there would only be justice. The prosecution team arrived at Alpine Station like a small army. Assistant U.S. Attorney Catherine Walsh led the group, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the kind of confidence that came from 20 years of winning high-stakes federal cases. Behind her came 2 junior prosecutors, 3 FBI agents, and a paralegal wheeling cases of documents. Mrs. Richardson, Emma, Walsh said, settling into the conference room with the efficiency of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. I'm going to be completely honest with you about what we're facing. Emma and I sat across from her, tablets and coffee cups arranged on the polished table between us. Through the windows, morning sunlight reflected off snow-covered peaks, a beautiful view that felt surreal given the circumstances. Victoria Ashworth has already filed 18 preliminary motions, Walsh continued, opening her briefcase. She's challenging the validity of the search warrants, questioning the chain of custody for financial evidence, and arguing that Emma's environmental research was conducted without proper authorization. Can she get the evidence thrown out? I asked. Some of it, possibly. Ashworth is very good at finding procedural technicalities, but the core of our case, the financial records, the recorded conversations, the pattern of selective prosecution, that's solid. Agent Martinez, who had arrived with the prosecution team, spread out a series of photographs across the table. Marcus in various settings over the past 5 years. Charity events, political fundraisers, private meetings with business executives. We've been building this case longer than you know, Martinez explained. The investigation into Marcus's activities began 3 years ago when the EPA noticed a pattern of dropped cases in his district. Emma's research provided the final pieces we needed. What about the murders? Emma asked. Dr. Vance, Thomas Reed, Sarah Mitchell. Can you prove Marcus killed them? Walsh's expression darkened. That's where it gets complicated. We have circumstantial evidence, timing, financial records showing payments to contract killers, communications, that suggest Marcus was coordinating the deaths. But proving murder beyond a reasonable doubt requires more direct evidence than we currently have. So he might not be charged with murder? He'll definitely be charged. Whether a jury convicts is another question. Ashworth will argue that the deaths were coincidental, that Marcus's communications were taken out of context. One of the junior prosecutors, a young man named James Chen, pulled out a thick binder of documents. The financial crimes are easier to prove. Bank records don't lie, and Marcus wasn't careful about hiding his offshore accounts. Why wasn't he more careful? Emma asked. If he's been doing this for years, why leave such obvious evidence? Arrogance, Martinez replied. Marcus. Richardson spent decades believing he was untouchable. District attorneys have enormous power, and he'd built a network of relationships that protected him from scrutiny. He never expected someone like Emma to stumble onto his operation. Walsh opened her laptop and began displaying a presentation that looked like it belonged in a corporate boardroom. Here's how we're going to structure the prosecution. We start with Emma's environmental research, establish the pattern of selective prosecution, then follow the money trail to prove Marcus was being paid to make cases disappear. The presentation was thorough and devastating. Charts showing the correlation between Marcus's prosecutorial decisions and payments to his shell companies. Audio recordings of conversations between Marcus and industrial executives. Environmental data that Emma had meticulously collected showing ongoing pollution that should have resulted in criminal charges. The grand jury phase is straightforward, Walsh continued. You'll testify about what you discovered, how you discovered it, and what happened when you tried to expose the truth. The grand jurors will hear Emma's story and see the evidence. Indictments are virtually guaranteed. And then? Then Victoria Ashworth goes to work. She'll spend months preparing to destroy both of your credibilities, to convince a trial jury that this is all a misunderstanding or a vendetta. I thought about the phone call with Marcus 3 nights ago. The cold certainty in his voice when he'd promised to finish what he'd started. What if Marcus tries to have us killed before the trial? That's why you're here, Deputy Marshal Santos interjected from her position by the door. Alpine Station has never lost a witness. The security measures are designed to protect against threats ranging from individual assassins to coordinated attacks by organized crime syndicates. Marcus has resources, Emma said. Contacts in law enforcement, private military contractors, enough money to hire professional killers. Which is why we're not taking any chances, Santos replied. Your testimony preparation will happen here, under maximum security. When you do testify, it will be in a courthouse that's been completely locked down, with security measures that rival presidential protection details. Walsh closed her laptop and leaned forward. I need you both to understand something. This isn't just about putting Marcus Richardson in prison. This case has the potential to expose corruption that extends far beyond one district attorney's office. The companies that paid Marcus, the officials who helped cover up environmental crimes, the entire network of people who profited from poisoning your community, they're all going to face justice. How many people are we talking about? I asked. Conservative estimate? 50 indictments across multiple states. Corporate executives, government officials, private contractors. This is going to be the largest environmental crime prosecution in federal history. The scope was staggering. What had started with Emma's research into pollution patterns had uncovered a conspiracy that spanned decades and involved dozens of powerful people. There's something else, Agent Martinez added, pulling out a separate folder. We've been analyzing Marcus's communication patterns for the past week. He's been in contact with people we haven't identified, using encrypted channels that suggest sophisticated operational security. What kind of people? The kind who specialize in making problems disappear. Marcus is planning something, and it's not just legal defense. A chill ran through the room as the implications sank in. Marcus wasn't just going to rely on Victoria Ashworth to win in court. He was preparing for contingencies that involved eliminating key witnesses. How close are you to identifying these contacts? Emma asked. NSA is working on breaking the encryption, but it could take weeks. In the meantime, we have to assume Marcus is coordinating with people who have the capability to reach you even here. Santos checked her watch and stood up. Which is why we're implementing additional security measures effective immediately. Mrs. Richardson, Emma, from this point forward, you'll have dedicated protection teams, round-the-clock surveillance, restricted movement within the facility, and emergency protocols in case of direct attack. The conference room felt smaller suddenly, The mountain views outside less beautiful and more like barriers keeping us trapped. We'd escaped from Marcus once, but the net was tightening around us again. When does grand jury testimony begin? Emma asked. Monday morning, 9 a.m., Walsh replied. 3 days from now. We'll spend the weekend doing final preparation, rehearsing questions and answers, preparing you for the kind of aggressive questioning you might face. From grand jurors? Grand jury proceedings are usually straightforward. Prosecutors ask questions, witnesses answer, jurors listen. But Ashworth has been filing motions to allow defense representation during testimony, claiming Marcus's constitutional rights are being violated. Can she do that? Probably not, but she's trying to create appealable issues for later. Every motion she files, every objection she raises, becomes potential grounds for overturning a conviction on appeal. One of the FBI agents, a woman named Detective Sarah Park, I recognized her as the same Detective Park who'd approached me at Emma's funeral, opened her own folder of documents. Mrs. Richardson, there's something we haven't discussed yet. Your role in this conspiracy. Emma and I exchanged glances. My role? For 5 years, you were married to Marcus Richardson. You lived in his house, attended his social events, had access to his home office and personal communications. Ashworth is going to argue that you must have known about his criminal activities. I didn't know anything. We believe you. But Ashworth will suggest you were either complicit in the crimes or negligently blind to obvious signs of criminal behavior. She'll try to paint you as an accomplice who turned against Marcus only after Emma's disappearance. The accusation hit like a physical blow. After everything Marcus had put us through, after the months of terror and deception, I might be portrayed as his criminal partner rather than his victim. What kind of evidence does she have? Emma asked, her voice tight with anger. Joint bank accounts, shared assets, your presence at social events where Marcus met with his criminal associates. On paper, you look like the perfect political wife who helped provide cover for her husband's operation. That's ridiculous. Mom had no idea what Marcus was doing. Emma's right, I said. Marcus kept his criminal activities completely separate from our marriage. I never saw suspicious bank records, never witnessed meetings with criminals, never had any indication that he was corrupt. Detective Park nodded sympathetically. We know that. The evidence clearly shows Marcus compartmentalized his operation, keeping family life separate from criminal activities. But Ashworth doesn't need to prove you were guilty. She just needs to create reasonable doubt about your motives for testifying against him. Walsh stood up, signaling the end of our morning session. This is why preparation is so important. We need to anticipate every angle Ashworth might take, every way she might try to attack your credibility or suggest ulterior motives. As the prosecution team gathered their materials, Emma reached across the table and took my hand. Whatever she throws at us, we stick to the truth. That's all we can do. The truth is powerful, Walsh agreed. Marcus Richardson built his operation on lies and deception. The environmental damage his clients caused is real. The people who died because he covered up their crimes are real. The fear and trauma he put both of you through is real. And the evidence is overwhelming, Martinez added. Bank records, audio recordings, environmental data, witness testimony. Victoria Ashworth is very good, but she's not a magician. She can't make facts disappear. After the prosecution team left, Emma and I remained in the conference room, staring out at the snow-covered mountains and processing what we'd learned. In 3 days, we would face a grand jury and begin the legal process that would either destroy Marcus's criminal empire or set him free to continue terrorizing anyone who threatened his operation. Mom, Emma said quietly, are you scared? Terrified, I admitted, but also angry. Marcus stole 5 years of my life, 6 months of yours, and God knows how many years from the people he had killed. I want him to pay for all of it, even if it means they try to make us look like criminals too, especially then. Because that's what Marcus does. He turns victims into villains, makes people doubt their own experiences, convinces everyone that his version of reality is the only one that matters. Through the conference room windows, I could see federal marshals patrolling the perimeter, their presence a reminder that even here, in one of the most secure facilities in the country, we weren't completely safe. Marcus's reach extended further than we knew, his resources deeper than we'd imagined. But for the first time since this nightmare began, we weren't facing him alone. We had federal prosecutors, FBI agents, environmental scientists, and a mountain of evidence on our side. Most importantly, we had each other. In 3 days, the real battle would begin. Victoria Ashworth would try to destroy us. Marcus would try to have us killed, and a grand jury would decide whether justice was possible in a system that had been corrupted from within. Whatever happens, I said to Emma, watching the sun climb, higher over the Colorado peaks, we tell the truth. All of it. All of it, she agreed. The truth about Marcus Richardson's crimes. The truth about the environmental destruction his clients had caused. The truth about the people who had died because they'd gotten too close to exposing his operation. And the truth about a family that had been targeted, manipulated, and terrorized by a man who'd convinced the world he was a pillar of justice and integrity. In 3 days, that truth would finally have its day in court. Whether we would survive long enough to see justice served was another question entirely. Monday morning arrived with crystal-clear skies and temperatures that made the Colorado air feel sharp against exposed skin. Emma and I stood in the secure transport area of Alpine Station, wearing bulletproof vests beneath our court-appropriate clothing, preparing for the helicopter ride that would take us to the federal courthouse. Grand jury testimony typically lasts 2 to 4 hours, Assistant U.S. Attorney Walsh reminded us one final time. Emma goes first, then Claire. Stay focused on the facts, answer only the questions asked, and remember, these jurors want to understand what happened. The flight to Denver passed quickly, our helicopter flanked by 2 military escorts and tracked by ground teams coordinating our security. Through the aircraft windows, I could see news vans already gathering around the federal courthouse, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like flowers following the sun. Inside the courthouse, we were escorted through service corridors to a secure witness room. The building hummed with activity, federal marshals positioning themselves at strategic points, bomb-sniffing dogs checking every corner, metal detectors screening every person who entered. Mrs. Richardson? A court clerk appeared at the witness room door. The grand jury is ready for your daughter. Emma stood, straightening her navy blazer and checking that her research folder was securely fastened. She looked young and vulnerable, but her voice was steady when she spoke. See you on the other side, Mom. The next 3 hours crawled by in silence. I sat in the witness room, watching news coverage on muted televisions, seeing Marcus's photograph, alongside reports about the corruption scandal rocking the district attorney's office. His mugshot from this morning's arrest showed a man I barely recognized, haggard, unshaven, the confident smile replaced by something cold and desperate. Finally, Emma emerged from the grand jury room, her face drained, but determined. Your turn, she said simply. The grand jury room was smaller than I'd expected, with 23 jurors seated in tiered rows facing a simple podium. Their faces reflected the gravity of what they'd been hearing. Environmental crimes, murder, systematic corruption extending across multiple states. Mrs. Richardson, Assistant U.S. Attorney Walsh began, please tell the grand jury how you met Marcus Richardson. For the next 2 hours, I told them everything. The charity gala that Marcus had manipulated to ensure our meeting, the 5 years of marriage built on lies, the empty coffin at Emma's staged funeral, my mother's warnings that everyone had dismissed as dementia-induced paranoia. The jurors listened intently, taking notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions through the prosecutor. When I finished, the room was completely silent. Thank you, Mrs. Richardson. the jury foreman said quietly. We have no further questions. Outside the grand jury room, Agent Martinez was waiting with news that would change everything. We broke Marcus's encrypted communications, she said, leading us to a secure conference room. The people he's been coordinating with aren't just contract killers. They're part of an international network that specializes in eliminating witnesses and destroying evidence in high-profile criminal cases. She pulled out photographs of 3 men, military-bearing, professional surveillance equipment, faces that suggested extensive combat experience. They arrived in Colorado yesterday. NSA intercepted communications suggesting they're planning to attack Alpine Station tonight, during the window when you would normally be returning from testimony. Emma grabbed my arm. They're going to try to kill us. They're going to try, Agent Martinez confirmed. But we're not going back to Alpine Station. We're implementing emergency protocols, new identities, immediate relocation, witness protection, until the trial concludes. The next few hours blurred together. New documents, new names, transport to a private airfield where a government jet waited with engines already running. As we climbed aboard, I caught a glimpse of news reports showing federal agents raiding the Alpine Station compound, finding sophisticated explosives and sniper equipment that would have turned our secure facility into a death trap. Where are we going? Emma asked as the jet lifted off. Better you don't know until we land, the federal marshal beside us replied. But somewhere Marcus Richardson and his associates will never find you. 3 days later, we learned that the grand jury had returned 47 indictments. Marcus faced federal charges including racketeering, money laundering, environmental crimes, and conspiracy to commit murder. Morrison Chemical and 6 other corporations faced criminal charges that would likely result in billions in fines and cleanup costs. Victoria Ashworth held a press conference, claiming prosecutorial overreach and promising to fight every charge. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, recorded conversations, environmental data that couldn't be explained away by legal maneuvering. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Emma and I testified from an undisclosed location via secure video link, our faces digitally obscured to protect our new identities. Marcus sat in the defendant's chair, his expensive suits unable to hide the defeat in his eyes, as witness after witness destroyed his carefully constructed lies. The jury deliberated for less than 8 hours, guilty on all counts. Marcus Richardson was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. 3 of his associates received similar sentences. The corporate executives who'd paid for his protection faced decades in federal prison. Emma returned to her marine biology studies under a new name, her research on environmental crimes becoming the foundation for stricter federal enforcement policies. The bay where she'd first discovered the pollution that started this nightmare is slowly healing. The company's responsible for its contamination paying billions for cleanup efforts. I rebuilt my life in a small coastal town 3,000 miles from Millbrook, working with environmental protection groups and victim advocacy organizations. Sometimes I think about the woman I used to be, the district attorney's wife who trusted her husband's carefully constructed facade. That woman feels like someone I knew a long time ago, in a different life. 2 years after Marcus's conviction, I received a letter forwarded through federal channels. It was from Detective Lisa Park, the sheriff's deputy who'd approached me at Emma's funeral with questions that seemed routine at the time. I wanted you to know, she wrote, that your case has changed how we investigate suspicious deaths in our county. 3 cases we previously ruled accidental have been reopened, and we've found evidence of foul play in 2 of them. Dr. Vance, Thomas Reed, and Sarah Mitchell are finally getting the justice they deserved. I showed the letter to Emma during one of our carefully arranged visits. She was thinner, more serious than before, but the spark in her eyes when she talked about her research was unchanged. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Exposing him? Destroying our old lives? I thought about the question carefully. We'd lost everything. Our home, our identities, our sense of safety in the world. But we'd also saved lives, protected the environment, and brought justice to people who'd been silenced by money and power. No, I said finally. The life we had was built on other people's suffering. This is better. Emma nodded, looking out at the ocean where she was conducting new research, documenting the slow recovery of marine ecosystems from industrial pollution. Sometimes I think about that empty coffin, she said. How Marcus made everyone believe I was dead while keeping me prisoner with fear. But we're not dead. We survived him. More than survived. We stopped him. The sun was setting over the water, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere out there, Marcus Richardson was beginning another day in federal prison, his empire of corruption reduced to memories and court records. And somewhere else, Emma and I were building new lives based on truth instead of lies, justice instead of compromise, hope instead of fear. The empty coffin had been filled with deception, but we had risen from it stronger than before. That was Marcus's greatest failure. He'd underestimated what people could accomplish when they finally stopped being afraid. In the end, the dead had been resurrected, and the living had found their way to justice. It wasn't the life we'd planned, but it was the life we'd earned, and for the first time in years, that felt like enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.